Can you hear me? Can anyone respond? Okay, all right. Thank you, Mary. Now, in lecture 2, we talk about democracy. Democracy means that we have elected government, that's the legislative and executive branches, which we cover in lecture 3. In lecture 7 and lecture 8, we'll deal with the unelected government here. The difference between 7 and 8 is that 7 is supposed to be independent. They pose checks and balances to the elective branches. Lecture 8, we cover the supportive one. Basically, they take order from the elected government. So this is what we are into, but we only focus on bureaucracy. It doesn't move. Okay, all right. There are 4 ideas here. What we want to, the first idea is that bureaucrats last longer than politicians in democracy. And therefore, sometimes they can be the real powers that be the one really in charge. Bureaucracy is supposed to serve the government of the day, but only within the confines of the law. They're not meant to be partisan. So their loyalty is actually public, not partisan. Third, civil servant must be neutral, be prepared to serve different parties. We'll look at that. And this is how we would argue that in multi-party democracy, as an element for policy, the connection is not stable. If anyone doesn't hear me, please let me know. All right. So the policy and political stability may hinge on the civil servant. That to attain that stability, civil servants must have job security to ensure their neutrality, because otherwise they can be penalized politically. This is different than, say, political appointees, which we're going to have an example in Ask Me, talking about this now. First thing I want to get to you is the idea about deep state. This is actually from Yes Minister, a British comedies in the 70s and 80s. And in here, this case, that the cabinet secretaries say, if the right people don't have the power, do you know what happened? The wrong people get it. Who are the wrong people? Politicians, councillors, ordinary voters. Basically, he see themselves as the only people that should be rightly in control. And this is a case where, to show you that sometimes politicians and civil servants may crash because they find themselves as rival in power. This was a case of a new Japanese prime minister in 2019, and he tried to rein in on the civil service, but his government lasted only perhaps 2 years. This is American war against the deep state by Trump. And at one point, he appointed Elon Musk to down the US government. So it's almost ideological. It's ideological warfare against the civil service, because partly big-time businessmen don't like the idea of big government, not only that it costs them taxes, but also because they impose a lot of regulation. But the other issue is that you also have populist voters who don't like strong government because they think that these are unelected, they are elites, they control the people, they are not accountable to the people. This is just to describe for you to see why are we talking about this state employee. Now, this is the news about Anwar Ibrahim, Malaysian Prime Minister, giving money to giving pay rise to the civil servant up to 13%. And this is important politically in the case of Malaysia, because the civil servant make up nearly 10% of the electorate, and with their families. So that's quite a huge vote bank. Now we go formally about what is bureaucracy. This, again, we go back to Max Weber. If you remember, this is the guy who offered us the authoritative definition of the state. Here, Max Weber defined bureaucracy with 5 elements. The first is a hierarchical structure. Second is management by rules. The third is organization by function, specialty. In other words, division of labor. The fourth is that it's purposely impersonal. So the state would follow rules and laws and regulations. Everything is rule by rule or law by law. And the final one is employment based on technical qualification. What you're talking about is a very rational scientific organization, unlike, say, in the pre-modern time that people around the ruler might be his families and so on. They may not have much rule constraining them. Modern bureaucracy is supposed to be much more regulated. I started with the idea of deep state, so let's look at the definition. Deep state is a term that got popular from Turkey because the military there was seen as the deciding force in the political system after 1926 when they established the modern Turkish 1924 after they established the modern republic and all the way until Erdogan came into power. But it's also used widely elsewhere, sometimes called the shadow government or state within the state. The idea here is that there's a group of people secretly in control. In non-democratic systems, these are just some secret, powerful elites. In democracy, it's always implied that these are unelected. And it's often used in conspiracy theory. Now, the next thing I want to bring to you is this public loyalty to the government. Let me start with where the role that civil servants are playing. This is a scene of parliament in the local government in Malaysia. The place where you see the yellow chairs and so on. Here you have the king, but normally this is where you have the speaker. And the oval circle, or if you can see from the map here, from A to G, this is where parliamentarians sit. Now, beneath the public gallery where you see media, members of the public, behind the politicians, as if you can see their shadows, people in the dark. Now, those are civil servants. Every ministry would send their representative there to listen to the parliamentary debate, to take note whatever concerning their ministry. And more importantly, minister would have to answer on questions from parliament. Who prepared those answers? Civil servant. So if you are a civil servant, you are part of the government, you would have to defend the government position in your public capacity. And if you're senior enough, there's no such thing as your private capacity. And this is what we mean by they have to support the government. Just now I mentioned about if they have questions. So these are example of parliamentary question. This is answer prepared by civil servants. And they have to support the government, but it's within the confine of the law. They're not partisan to say, I support the government no matter what. No. I want to bring to your attention that civil service is not mandatory or should not be at all expected to support only the current government. They should support any parties that come into power. How far would it go? In established democracy like the UK, if you have a hung parliament, as in the case of 2010, where no party actually wins a majority, what happened? Then the main party would compete to get some smaller party to form a coalition government. The then Prime Minister Gordon Brown was from the Labour Party, and his opponent, David Cameron, from the Tories. Both are competing to get support from the minor party, especially the third party, Lib Dem. And in this situation, the Prime Minister actually make arrangement for the opposition to consult civil servants in how they're going to form the government. Why would they do so? Because that from the political class point of view, you're not going to undermine the country simply because you lose an election. You want the next government to be functional. Therefore, when they form government, they have to think about policy and they need advisors. And civil servants are the one they need to talk to. But from civil service point of view here, it's very clear cut. You don't have a fixed boss. Anyone who comes into power, that's your boss. You're serving them as part of your public duty. It's not private. It's not private favor. It's not private obligation. The whole idea here is a public relationship. You're serving the public. But are all people having this public loyalty? No. Some can have partisan loyalty. These are people who come in as political appointees like secretaries, special officers, and advisor. They are brought in by the minister. They should leave if the minister leave or the government resign or the government terms end. So here you have a situation where we have to separate between normal civil servants who should be loyal to the government within the confines of the law, of the structure, and then as tiny partisan political appointees who don't have to. And in Lecture 7, which will come back after Ask Me, we will see the other way. Now, next I want to bring to policy and political stability. This is actually a minister in UK. She was in charge of Brexit, Britain exit from the European Union. And she complained that she did not only have to fight her enemies in the parliament, the chamber, but also resistance from within the civil service. She described it as if like you have two fronts to fight. Why? She felt that the civil service in UK have a bias for UK to stay within or remain within the EU. And while the government is mandated to take UK out of EU, they encounter many obstacles. So this is the story. I want to next play this one. Even? Yeah, sorry. Oh, can you play from there? You can, right? Okay. What should I do? Should I stop? Huh?
So you stop.
Did it?
Stop sharing.
Okay.
And then go back.
And then go back to this one. Hey, this is not Zoom, right? This one. Okay. This one? No. Yeah, yeah. And no.
You just pause. I think it went to the other.
Huh?
You go up.
Oh, this is the one on top. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear from that? Job services Can you see the new slide? Okay, all right. Now, what you have heard just now was Professor Jeff Sachs describing how Putin critiques of wait, I cannot move this. I cannot go to resume slide. I cannot enlarge this. Close this. I'll try again. Maybe because just now I didn't close properly. No, right? This is. Can you see this? Can you see in full? As,
No.
sorry.
Try on.
Yeah. All right. Got it. Hey, yeah. Isn't this one? No.
No, but now it's shown or oh,
Okay. All right. People, can you see this correctly? Okay. Now, what you have heard was Professor Jack Sack describing how Putin see the America's deep state. He gave a very vivid, graphic description. Man in dark suits with briefcase, with blue ties. This is the deep states, and he said that they run foreign policy much more consistently than any individual president does. What it means is that you can change the electorate, can change the government, change the president, but the policy may remain the same because whichever president come in, they cannot in any way shift the policy as such. This is a common critique that you heard from that. And because that state do have policy stability, they don't fluctuate from one end to another because everything is moving between certain range. Not that impossible, but you would have to shift the ground before you actually get to that. And it's not only in foreign policy, it's also in everywhere else. You find that state policy are relatively stable. Of course, there are people who are not happy. For example, President Trump. President Trump believed that American policy has undermined American interests a lot. That's why his Make America Great Again MAGA campaigns go against all this. What happened next is that at the beginning of Trump terms, he wants to withdraw American involvement overseas, bring it back, and so on. But the other thing he does was, of course, his trade tariff. He aggressively imposed tariffs on American trade partners in the name of reciprocity and in a very crude formula that if you have a certain percentage of trade deficits against America, then half of that would be a tariff rates, half of that deficit of that of the of that American deficit would be imposed as tariff. And he did all these things basically bypassing the policy establishment. And on 2nd of February 2024, which he called the Liberation Day, he released a whole list of reciprocal tariffs on different countries and using his bullying style negotiation tactics, getting a lot of countries uh, to bow to American pressure. Now, but some part of it can be quite funny. For example, on his list, it includes an island in South Pacific or Antarctic called Hurt and McDonald's Islands, where you don't have humans. You only have penguins and seals. How could this happen? Because the decision making in the Trump administration was simply bypassing hostile towards and therefore sidelining civil servants. You have new people running all this, and that's the case. This is laughable, but the consequence of that is much greater. For example, America may be going into war with Venezuela and so on. Is trade wars disrupt the whole economic order, hurting American state capacity, and so on. That's all has to do with Trump's attitude and hostility against civil servants in America. And civil servant is not only important for policy stability, it's also important for political stability. For example, you could have a country without a, a full government for more than a year. This is the examples of Belgium between 2010 to 2011 for 597 years. We are talking about two-thirds, 1 year and more than 1.5 years. They have only a caretaker government. What is a caretaker government? The last government has collapsed. The new government could not be formed because politicians could not agree on who to form the government. So they only have a caretaker government that do not make any major decisions. And this caretaker government is more or less run by bureaucrats. Belgium did not suffer anything, and people probably did not realize that they have not have a full government in force. Last thing we want to look at is job security and abuse. Bureaucrats are public servants. They are not partisan hires. Their idea is that they're supposed to survive government change, which means that they should not get punished because you have a new government coming in. And that makes their jobs like iron rice bowls. This is a term used in China because you're hard to be removed unless they are on contract, like political appointees, which we look next, or which we talk about just now. The political appointees, they actually can be removed because they are on contract much more easily. But it doesn't mean that civil servants are completely safe. In the past, for example, in Malaysia, if you were designated as anti-government, for example, you're a teacher, but your colleagues reported to the government and say, this guy has been anti-government, you might actually get punished by being transferred across the state overnight. So your whole family life get disrupted. The other way to punish you is to cold storage you, for example, move you to the state headquarters, put you in the office. Basically, you have no job to do. You can read newspaper, but that's what you're going to spend. You get your salary, but some people just cannot tolerate that kind of boring life, and you resign. That's exactly what they want. So this is how job security is about. By and large, civil servants are quite protected. That could also cause potential power abuses. For example, they may entrench themselves, forming cartels and cliques, and making recruitment and promotion within the civil service based on know who rather than know how. The other second point is that they become a partisan instrument. So they just basically carry things out, even though they're supposed to, they can afford independence, but they decided to go along with the government, and their relationship with the government becomes symbiotic. This is very likely if you have a dominant government. Finally, they could collude with business interests. Sometimes it's actively extorting businesses. This is possible if you have a lot of red tapes, a lot of process to go through, and the process is non-transparent, not accountable. Therefore, businesses, in order to get your decision fast, otherwise they have to pay banks interest. So what they do is that they bribe you, and this is a problem. A check against bureaucratic corruptions, of course, to have a small government, not the type that what you've seen in America, where Trump's X down government organization, just shrinking it, or the other way is sunshine policy to introduce transparency. Now, just to show you, these are the two tables on ASEAN about bureaucracy reform in ASEAN. Compare Singapore, which has very few corruption cases as compared to others. You find that Singapore also has a very short period, a simplified regulatory process for importing and exporting, and in paying taxes These are much lesser than others. That shows you a little bit of the relationship between how much power you have and how you may actually, how much, how how complicated the process of getting approval, therefore how much power you have, and then how you might be tempted to abuse your power. Now I'm going to, this is what we have covered very briefly. I'm going to next get ask me Nick Fatiu to join us. Yeah. And what you, hi, yep, come here. Come. I'll pass it over to you. Okay. This is Asmi. Asmi, one of the smartest person I have come across in public sector. He was a UK returnee, returned to Malaysia to join the government as Minister 8, despite having a very comfortable job in the Shell in UK. So I pass it to you and do your introduction. The class before you enjoyed his talk so much that we could not almost start with this.
So let me get my notebook first.
Okay. And I hope that you can briefly introduce yourself. Everyone turn on your video. So hi, could everyone turn on your video? So you introduce yourself to Nick. Nick asked me, not Nick asked me. And then you can continue. Yeah, you don't have to start. You can just stop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. So my name is Azmi. If you would like to check my LinkedIn profile, my name is Azmi Nik Fadil, Nikfathil. Azmi is AZMI, of course. It's incomplete because I haven't updated for my previous role and my current role, but otherwise it's enough information for you to go by. If you're active on Twitter or X, there have been a few incidents, which I can assure you most of them are misunderstanding. But otherwise, my name is Googleable, and you will get my background info from there. So, of course, thank you to Prof. Wong Chin Huat for inviting me today. This is more of a dialogue session rather than a lecture, because lecture-wise, I think Prof. Wong has probably circulated his slide deck earlier on, and his lectures, I believe. It's okay if you cannot project your video, it's fine. I can see your face pretty well from your profile picture, Mary Ivy. I have to apologize, I can't pronounce your name. But otherwise, I'm here to share my experience and perhaps answer any question that you have. So, even if you want to stop sharing your video for now, it's okay. Perhaps when we get to Q&A, when you want to ask your question, you can turn on your video again. But otherwise, I welcome all the live feed. So, my name is Azmi. I went to Imperial College London. I worked with the accounting audit firm EY before I moved on to a smaller firm and then later with Shell. And then I came back to Malaysia in 2019 to join the Ministry of Education, but mostly in the higher education sector. So my first minister was Dr. Mazli Malik, and I strongly believe in his vision for education. And I'm not sure how he can contribute, but that's another story altogether. Uh, and then from there, I moved on to a few smaller portfolios. And until recently, I was at the Ministry of Health. And now I'm with the Selangor state government. So one of the reasons why Prof. Wong Chin Huat invited me was because of first my private sector experience before, and then I joined the federal government and now with the state government. So brought enough experience to be able to provide perhaps practical examples, how to relate all the theory that you learn from classroom to real life scenario lah, so called. And I'm not limiting my experience to the Malaysian political system only. I'm very familiar with the UK civil service system as well as the EU bureaucracy. So well, I'm not an expert, but I can give some real life practical experience interacting with them or dealing with them, especially in terms of their laws and regulations lah. So with that respect, perhaps I can collect a few questions first, and then I can try to answer them, and I will continue my sharing based on your question. Anyone? Okay, that's fine. So allow me to go back to your slide. So Prof. Wong has, I would say, wisely quoted Sir Humphrey Appleby, a fictional character in the show Yes Minister and later Yes Prime Minister. And ironically or sarcastically or whatever it may be, unfortunately, the situation as portrayed in the shows, the two shows, are 99% correct. This is exactly how most civil service behaves. So they run their own small kingdom, and then the politicians come and go, and most of them come in ill-equipped to deal with the system, and they leave the system not being able to effect any meaningful change. Of course, in the show Yes Prime Minister, the minister eventually, or the prime minister, eventually learned how to deal with the civil servants, and he eventually became in control. And it provided very valuable lessons to our politicians as well as what I call political operators on how to go into the system, learn, adapt, and be able to introduce change and execute it really well. So the weakness that we have with the Pakatan Harapan government in 2018 was when they first came in, the ministers were all very junior. Some of them were never even an MP. And even if they were an MP, they never held a senior leadership or managerial role in the previous government or in the previous organization. As a result, when they came into the, or each ministry that they were posted to or assigned to, they were not able to translate all the policy promises in their manifesto into real change. And a lot of it also boils down to the selection of ministerial aides or ministerial assistants. Pegawai Menteri in Malay, if you want to relate it to a more familiar term. For those who do not know, you can refer to a circular from the Public Service Department, Pekeliling Jawatan Perkhidmatan Awam, JPA. There's a job description of all the ministerial aides. The more public one is the one from 2018, which was under the Pakatan Harapan government. There are a few positions in there with their own job description, and you will note that there's a grade, civil service grade, assigned to each post, and most of them is at grade 54. This grade 54 in civil service is equivalent to senior manager if you are in Petronas. So relatively a very senior role. But you will find that most of the ministerial officers, even under this current government, are relatively very young. Most of them are early 30s. Very few of them are very senior. So there is a situation where you have a huge gap. First, if your officers are not from the civil service, they don't speak the same language. And then, even if they are from the civil service or they have civil service experience, they're not senior enough, therefore they cannot command the respect and obedience and cooperation from the civil servants. So you have this situation where there is a huge gap between the minister and the civil service establishment. And surprisingly, the UMNO ministers adapt better. So when I was at the Ministry of Youth and Sports, the minister then, Datuk Sri Rizal Marikan, now chairman of Matrade, appointed all civil servants as ministerial aides. And they were at the appropriate grade. Most of them were at 52. So 52 is one level below 54. and therefore the gap is not that huge. As a result, it was a very pleasant experience for me, having to deal with very capable, very mature, and very responsible ministerial aides. But the same is not true for other ministries, for all the ministries that I've been in. So I've been in education and higher education, and then youth and sports, and then national unity, and then health, and now with the state government. And I can tell you that the UMNO or BN ministers know better how to work the system. Of course, because they have the benefit of being 60 years in government, and therefore they have the institutional knowledge, and they can select the best officers for each of the portfolio that they are in charge of. The same is not true for PH ministers. So if you hear all the complaints from the people that ministerial team are not responding, communication has been very bad, the government does not manage comms well, all this boils down to talent pipeline. Unfortunately, the less qualified and less experienced ministers do not manage their talent pipeline as good as the more senior ministers. So that's the challenge that our country has. Singapore inherits the same system as Malaysia. The Constitution of Singapore is almost word for word compared to the Malaysian Constitution, including the provisions for Malay special privileges. But they interpret their constitution very differently. They build their system very differently. And from their system, they build their institutions also very differently. And therefore, they have a much more efficient civil service, if you can argue that way. And the political establishment also has a very, I would say, more sophisticated and more mature talent pipeline development. Half of their cabinet currently are former civil servants, and most of them are former senior civil servants. One of the reason being, they have a system where they have revolving door. So civil servants, state-owned enterprises employees and private sector employees can move between the different sectors. And then the senior ones, the secretary general or permanent secretary level, can only hold position for 10 years. So if they get promoted to SecGen level at 45, by 55 they have to retire already. But then if they are good, they will be raised to minister. Like Lawrence Wong was a senior civil servant. Lee Hsien Loong was a former army general, etc., etc. You just look at the profile of Singapore ministers, you will see that they are highly qualified. Secondly, even the presidential election, after they amended the constitution, they put minimum requirement. Like, if I'm not mistaken, if they are in government, if they were in government, they must be at least Jusasi level, which is junior VP level. Or if they run a business, turnover must be more than 10 million Sing dollar per annum. And then they have other requirements also. So there is a checks and balances in terms of who can be president. Not any Tom, Dick and Harry popular former film star can run for election and become president. No, because the constitutional duty of president includes managing the foreign reserve and ensure social equity. These are written in their constitution. So any candidate who has never run a big organization, do not have the necessary organizational experience, cannot execute this role efficiently. So these are the checks and balances built into the Singapore system. So Singapore, right, even when you start early as MP, you already have certain minimum requirement, like junior managerial level. You become MP, then become parliamentary secretary, PASEC. Then you become minister of state or deputy minister, and then only you become minister. There's a very rigid talent pipeline development system with regards to Singapore. And that's how the Singapore system, whether the civil service or the political establishment, can function quite well. Because they ensure that people who enter into the system is qualified, and people who get promoted also qualified, both in the civil service as well as in the political establishment. So, any question?
People don't be shy if your question asked.
Uh, Hi, Asmi. Sorry, I
Hi,
got one
Brandon.
question.
Of course.
So as I mean, you've mentioned Singapore's constitution are nearly identical. I mean, that's not quite identical, similar to Malaysia. Why
Hmm.
can Singapore implement this sort of talent development system, and why not Malaysia can't actually have this system in place?
It is mostly, I would say, my hypothesis is that because we do not have the political will and we do not have the same level of consciousness that Singapore has. Singapore is not blessed with natural resources. So when Lee Kuan Yew initiated his reforms and later further his reforms in the 90s, before he handed over to Goh Chok Tong, he had this very simple uh, doctrine, if you can say, in mind, which of course you can read his book or listen to some of the videos published on YouTube, which is if we survive for today. But if we build, we build for the future. So this doctrine of self-sufficiency as well as long-term vision is very ingrained as a national ideology. And they reinforce that by writing it into the constitution, writing it into their laws. And when they implement these laws into government departments, into programs, into policies, etc., they ensure that every aspect of this doctrine is translated into action. So that's the difference. I will give you one very brutal, very controversial, but I have to say very honest example also. Take Akta Majlis Amanah Rakyat. Akta Majlis Amanah Rakyat, which gave birth to MRSM, the Mara Junior Science College, as well as UITM, University Technology Mara. Mara, especially UITM, is very synonymous with Malay Bumiputra policy. So UITM is said now, or claimed to be, exclusively for Malays and Bumiputra. That is what they claim. But please do me a favor. Go on Google, search for Akta Majlis Amanah Rakyat. Tell me, where does the word Malay or Bumiputra appear in the Akta Majlis Amanah Rakyat? I challenge you. None. All this claim about MARA, MRSM, and UITM being exclusively for Malay and Bumiputra is a political fiction reinforced through daily messaging for decades, but never written into law. Can anyone challenge me on that? But this is exactly one of the brutal example where, despite the Singapore Constitution having almost identical provision for Malay extra special privileges, and of course the special provision for Islam, Singapore has the Majlis Ugama Islam Singapura, of course, but they take a very different interpretation and translate it into very different policies. You can have the same provision in the Constitution. You can have the law based on the interpretation of the Constitution, and you have very different outcome. This is a matter of culture. This is a matter of our political will and our conviction. If we interpret the same thing very differently, we will arrive at very different programs and therefore very different outcomes. I'm not sure whether I've answered your question.
Yes, I guess so. It's definitely a broader part of a discussion that I would say it's because from my point of view, obviously what you just say it's controversial, and I do agree that this Bumiputra rights topic is a very controversial topic within Malaysia. So, but yeah, I think that's pretty much answer my inquiries. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question?
Hi, Azmi. Saifuddin here from JB.
Hi.
Hi. You mentioned just now about ministers having the special officers, right? What about
Yeah.
uh, advisors? Is there a limit as to how many advisors can a minister have, and who pays for their salary?
Okay, there are a few advisor level position like penasihat sains negara, National Scientific Advisor, and the pengarah ekonomi Jabatan Perdana Menteri, the Prime Minister Department's economic director. So these are advisors which can be up to ministerial level. So if they are ministerial level, meaning they receive the same level of aides or special officers like minister. And also they get to travel on first class, etc. lah. They are paid for by the government unless they are hired by a GLC like Khazanah and seconded to government. So they can be paid by GLC or Khazanah, etc. It is possible. But most of the time, the advisors are paid by the taxpayers directly. But at the same time, the difference being advisors don't work on a day-to-day basis. Ministers only tap to their expertise whenever needed, if there is an issue. So in corporate governance, whenever you have this level of appointments, right? Doesn't matter it's a board position or advisor position. Our Green Book or Corporate Governance Code recommends regular, uh, I forgot the exact wording, but regular meetings. Meaning you have to schedule a minimum of 4 meetings per year and equally spaced out, meaning every 3 months lah, more or less. This is part of good governance to ensure that ministers don't run like a runaway train, unguided. Because most ministers are politicians. They're not subject matter experts. If any of you follow Idris Jalla on his podcast, The Impossible Games, he interviewed Khairi Jamaluddin, KJ, the former health minister. And KJ made a very interesting remark, which is, when I first came to the Ministry of Health, I knew nothing. Therefore, I assembled a team of experts, a top consulting firm, McKinsey, BCG, etc. They sent all their senior partners from all over the world. And these people gave an onboarding, a crash course to KJ for 2 weeks. So the first 2 weeks is intensive crash course and hiring the right officers. This is what KJ said in the podcast. And that is the right thing, which unfortunately, I have to be honest that in our current government, there is no such onboarding. So minister comes to the ministry, they can select whoever they want, including people, career politicians who've been following them for the past 20 years, no corporate experience, no government experience, nothing, just administrative day-to-day experience managing MP's office, etc. And suddenly they're managing one of the biggest ministries in the country. 30 billion budget, 40 billion budget, or even 50 billion like Health Ministry and Ministry of Education. And I have to be very honest, it has been very disastrous for our country. I mean, before KJ, I mean, can I ask you, who here was happy or were happy with the performance of the health minister before KJ? Eye swam, Spanish fly, remember?
Yes,
And
yes.
who's happy with the current Minister of Education or the one before that? Are you impressed with any minister now, if not Tengku Zafrul, which I have to say performing very well, or Amir Hamzah, who's I would say very militant, but well, he's okay. But other than these two professionals from the corporate sector brought into government, who do you think are the better performing ministers in the current government? I mean, I welcome your feedback if you have any. I mean, there are a few good guys lah. People I deeply respect as ministers, but in terms of performance lah.
I think personally for me, it's difficult to assess because you hardly see them.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you hardly see them. I mean, there are ministers who previously in other governments, like even like Datuk Jo Gani.
Mm,
But I think the issue is that under this government, you only see a few ministers
mm,
rather than you don't get to see the rest. So it's very difficult to assess whether they have done a good job or not.
mm,
I think
mm.
that's my view.
Yeah. Of course, my argument here is not our ministers are not performing. That's not my message. My simple question was, who can you champion that this minister that I'm going to name is performing?
Okay.
Meaning if you nominate, say, Datuk Jo, right? then you must be able to give me 3 examples where he has delivered for the country. So that's my only question. Dato' Jo is doing a very good job, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah. But my question is, who can you nominate in this discussion? And when you nominate, give me 3 top performances. So top deliverables, sorry. But it's okay if you cannot, that's fine. Because our ministers are not that visible lah. In that sense. In that sense. But it's okay. Any other question? Any question on the government, on our laws, whether our laws are adequate, whether our laws are protecting our children? Are we regulating sex offenders enough? No? Please, question. If not, then I will share with you one question from the previous class or previous session. It's about, do we have enough guarantee in our system, in our law, to ensure sustainability or resilience of our government system? So we talk about, of course, we touched some on education. But then the one that I gave forward as an example was Companies Act. Because I was an accountant, now still an accountant in some way. So Companies Act is very close to my heart, or rather being practiced almost on a daily basis lah. So Australia passed their Companies Act in 2002. And then UK followed suit in 2006. And then Malaysia passed our Companies Act in 2016, which is 10 good years after the UK passed their Companies Act. When the UK passed their Companies Act in 2006, it was the single biggest piece of law ever passed by the UK Parliament. If I were to make a very rough comparison, our Companies Act is about 1/3 of UK's Companies Act, despite the Malaysia Companies Act being passed in 2016. The UK's Companies Act, when it was passed, was quite controversial because it includes certain duties to shareholders and companies like protecting the civil society and protecting the environment. If I were to be unfairly brutal in terms of language, we can say that our Companies Act allow our companies to screw over the people, pollute the environment, as long as they're not caught by law. It's not true, but I'm just putting it in a brutal way. Whereas the UK's Companies Act put it a duty on the shareholders and on the company to protect the local society and protect the environment. This is written into law. In that sense, our law is not protecting the public enough. So there is a huge gap in our laws, and that is only on the company's law. And what about political law? We do not have a law on political funding. People can receive money from China, from Israel, from anyone. Political funding, and run for election, and win, and run programs or policies to pay back their donors. So if they're paid for by China, then they will create policies that favor China. There's nothing in our political funding law that stops our politicians from being paid by foreign agents. Compared to the US Constitution. The US Constitution very explicitly bans foreign funding. Because at that point in time, when they achieved independence, the UK government and the East India Company was very rich that they can buy over politicians. So the UK system was more visionary in that sense. When they achieved independence, they immediately banned foreign funding. Now it's a different story because they've amended their law. But the point here being, we don't even know who among our politicians are paid foreign agents. because our laws do not provide for that system or that transparency. So, do you have any comment on that statement? No? Relatively a very quiet group. Come on, you can ask question beyond Malaysia. If I can answer, I will try to answer.
For instance, Mary from the Philippines. The other one is Aisha from Indonesia, Kalimantan.
Okay. Of course, both Philippines and Indonesia have presidential system where you can appoint technocrats, unelected technocrats as ministers. The most famous one being previous finance minister Sri Mulyani, as well as the previous education minister, the Gojek founder, Nadiem Makarim. But then it's not always the case, meaning even presidents are beholden to political interests. And in order to secure political support, they also appoint political allies as ministers. But in the Westminster system, you have very little choice. You must appoint elected MPs or sometimes very limitedly senators as ministers. And therefore, your only checks and balances is the ministerial aides, the ministerial officers. If you select very bad ministerial officers to appoint MPs who have no experience in the area, for example, Ministry of Health or Ministry of Education, then you end up having huge trouble in those ministries. So perhaps you can ask a question on current issues, not non-political current issues, if you have one.
Hi,
Hello.
hello, my name is Kahan from Sabah.
Okay, hi.
I'm just wondering, I mean, with all that have been said, what will be your recommendations in closing those gaps when we have unelected, like ministerial aid officers that are working, has to work together very closely with the respective ministers, civil servant?
Currently, unfortunately, it all falls on the minister to make the right appointment. And they also face limitations, such as they must reward their long-term followers. So we do have situations where ministers appoint long-time allies as their ministerial aides or even advisors. And some ministries who have state-owned enterprises under them, sometimes they also get appointed to the board of these state-owned enterprises or government-linked companies. In terms of how to regulate that, currently my only proposition is that we must have a law. On top of the political funding law, we must also have a law on political appointments. In the US, whenever the president nominates someone to become a secretary or minister or even ambassador, they must go through Senate confirmation hearing. So the relevant committee, like Foreign Relations Committee, will vet through all Secretary of State and ambassadorial appointments, and then it goes to the Senate and Senate votes. They must get minimum 60 votes. So that is one possible checks and balances. But of course, you cannot burden our parliament with such a task because our MPs are mostly also not that qualified, I would argue. But perhaps you can legislate. You can create a law governing. The ministers are called anggota pentadbiran or member of the administration. You can create a law regulating members of the administration, including how they can make appointments to their office. You can legislate minimum requirement, maybe a minimum of university level degree or minimum of 15 years experience working in a big organization, or something along that line, but must be flexible enough, of course. And then, like Singapore also put minimum requirement on the president. And by putting that requirement on the president, indirectly, you're also putting a minimum requirement on the ministers also. Ministers cannot be too underqualified. But of course, Singapore does not have that problem because half of their cabinet are former senior civil servants. Former ketua setiausaha, former ketua pengarah, former general. So they don't have problem with talent pipeline. But to write that into law, you must have a strong political will because many people in the political establishment will oppose it. If the law disqualifies them from holding high office, why would they support the law? So that's the big question mark. So to overcome this, we must build a strong culture in our political system. But it's a chicken and egg question. Do you build the culture first or do you build the law first? I cannot give an answer. But at least in Singapore, they do both. They create a strong culture, but they also write it into law. I'm not sure whether I've answered your question.
Yes, and in a way, I mean, in Malaysia, I do see some problems that we will face, of course, like you mentioned, because if we are talking about creating a new law and it's especially it's relevant directly to our politicians, nobody will dare to make that move unless it's from politicians themselves. But then again, they will have to go to the parliament and get the supports from majority, and most likely it will be turned down. But perhaps a multilateral organizations can make that push
Yeah,
for
that's
this
where
strong change. Yeah.
that's where the role of the civil society comes in. The sad reality is that civil society organizations in Malaysia are not that strong. Our unions are not that strong. Our other NGOs are not that strong. So Bersih pushes for the political financing reform. But because it works against our current politicians, and I have to make this grand claim that certain politicians used to get funding from foreign governments. I do not know about now, but some of them used to get funding from foreign government. And of course, they wouldn't want to have a political funding law because then they will lose their source of funding for their political activities. I will give one simple example. During COVID time, so many politicians distribute these food boxes, kotak makanan, food aids, yeah? So there's some cooking oil, sugar, rice in the box. Some of these boxes are provided by charitable organizations operating through our foreign embassies here. Embassies of rich countries give CSR funding for this kind of social programs. And of course, it doesn't appear corrupt because they're not paying the politicians into their pocket. But they are funding the politicians' political activity. And we don't have a law to regulate all this kind of funding. Nobody needs to declare anything. And do you think that these politicians will not be beholden and grateful to the funder? Let's say a rich country in the Middle East funding all these social activities. Of course, there will be some gratitude, right? And this is dangerous. Running charity is not dangerous, but making our politician dependent on foreign funding is risky. And who is going to stop another country, let's say China, from funding a political party at the next election, the same way that a Saudi prince funded our former prime minister 4.2 billion ringgit. Any foreign country or foreign billionaire can buy our election. Is that healthy? I would argue it's not healthy. And we need to stop that. We need to have political funding law, which we don't have. I hope that answers your question.
Asmi, sorry, I have one question based on that, based on your remarks. So you emphasize the importance of having a political funding law, and with per se, I would say arguably it's one of the biggest political movements that we have in Malaysia, or political, yes, whatever they call it, right? So what more can we do to push government to propose such law that restricts or limits political funding?
Unfortunately, in our case, our civil society organizations are not that strong. Therefore, organizing the grassroots to put pressure on our MPs and future MPs during election is quite difficult. But then, if many people in many areas can start questioning the next group of candidates at the next general election, right? Every political rally pressure them into answering and give a pledge that if elected at the next parliament, they will support political reform by having first or political funding law. If you can do that, then at least it creates some pressure. I find it disheartening that despite ideas and Bersih's push for political funding reform, very few other civil society organizations or social groups actually come in to support and pressure the Prime Minister into enacting political funding reform. It's quite sad. I do believe that more members of the public should come up, write letters to editors, publish Facebook posts, publish Twitter posts, or maybe TikTok videos to support every time Bersih issues a new statement on political funding, or every time ideas publish new statement or report on political funding. That would be helpful. But at the same time, if only 10 people speak, it will not create enough wave lah. But if 100,000 people speak, even on social media, if one tweet can get 100,000 share, or one Facebook post can get 100,000 share, or one TikTok video gets 2 million likes, then it would be significant enough to put pressure on the political establishment. But our people get enriched so easily on very small, very petty issues. And when it comes to serious discussion, there's no appetite. So the political the establishment happily, day to day, just ignore all the reform promises, lah. Unfortunately.
Thank you, Asmi.
Thank you.
Hi, Yasmin. I mean, following to that, right? Because you have moved from a federal ministry to a state government now. So perhaps then you can see the opportunities. Are there any opportunities that we can start from the state level?
Okay, there are some promises like limiting the chief minister's term to 2 terms. Some of it are not enacted yet. I will not mention which state, but some state has passed constitutional amendments to limit the chief minister's term. Others have not. And then there were promises to separate the finance portfolio from the chief minister's portfolio. That is also not followed through. Most chief ministers are still finance exco at state level. And then this so-called freedom of information enactment. Even though it was passed in Penang and Selangor, they're not really enforced. Some of the requests for freedom of information gets ignored. So there's no real enforcement on such reforms. In terms of reform of the state agencies and government-linked companies, Penang and Selangor has been very advanced. I would say their house is in order with regards to state-owned companies or state-owned agencies. And of course, the other one which is quite developed but questionable is Johor. Some of the Johor-owned companies are listed even, like J-Corp-owned companies, KPJ, etc. But to what extent does it contribute to nation building? In what way does it push further reform agenda? So these are the difficult questions that needs to be answered. And unfortunately, I cannot provide an answer now. And I do not know when all these reforms will eventually be implemented. The other promise which is still unfulfilled is to restore the third vote, electing local councillors. Still nowhere to be found. If you have the pleasure of going to my Twitter account, you will find that I made a tweet yesterday arguing for having an elected government in wilayah persekutuan, which is against, in a way, against Nick Nazmi's proposal. So Nick Nazmi and a few PKR MPs put forward a proposal to have an elected DBKL. And my counter proposal is it's useless to have an elected DBKL if the rule is still top down at Jabatan Wilayah Persekutuan or Kementerian Wilayah Persekutuan level. Because DBKL is, well, mostly local council. Most of the budget and most of the lawmaking happens at DUN level or state level, not at DBKL level. So my argument is have an elected Dewan Undangan Wilayah Persekutuan first and have an elected Chief Minister for Wilayah Persekutuan first rather than having an appointed Minister in the Prime Minister's Department for Wilayah Persekutuan. My argument is it's better to have that first. There's one reform which is quite controversial. It was controversial quite recently lah, which is the appointment of senior judges via the Judicial Appointment Commission. The Judicial Appointment Commission, when it was introduced by Pak Allah, was an improvement from the previous system, which relies mostly on the Prime Minister advising the AGO. It is an improvement, but the argument is it does not remove enough risk for political interference in the appointment of judges. So that's the argument. My argument is maybe yes, maybe not, but probably legal scholars, especially the Bar Council, the Sabah Law Society, and the Sarawak Law Society can debate that further because they are the subject matter experts. But perhaps we should have a similar law for political appointments, meaning appointment of ministers and ministerial aides. That's number one. Number two, Singapore had successfully implemented our own version of government transformation plan and economic transformation plan. So their state-owned enterprises, Temasek, GIC, and other enterprises, are managed professionally now with a proper checks and balance mechanism. Even Indonesia has Kementerian Perusahaan Negara. So Minister or Ministry for State-Owned Enterprises, which we don't have. Currently, Minister of Finance and Prime Minister are fully in charge of our state-owned enterprises. And now they are the same person. So the Prime Minister has full discretion over appointments which would require technocratic experience, like CEO of Petronas, Managing Director of Khazanah, Chairman of PNB, Chairman and CEO of KWSP, etc., etc., etc. How comfortable are we that when each appointment is made, that the best candidates are selected? How can we know? Do we know the interview process? Do we know the selection process? Do we know the criteria that the government uses in selecting the next CEO of KWSP, our biggest fund manager? We do not. And because we do not have a ministry for that purpose, there's no accountability to Parliament also. Of course, now our CEOs of GLCs are very qualified, eminently qualified. I am thankful for it. But The sad reality is we don't have a law. We don't have a structure for checks and balances in this area. That's a sad reality. So we don't have a law, or we don't have a law to manage political funding. We don't have a law regulating top political and civil service appointments. We don't have a law regulating the management and appointment of top executives at our GLC. Even our Companies Act are very skeletal compared to UK and Australia, which I'm very familiar with. So how is our government actually functioning? How are you comfortable that our government is effectively run? How can you benchmark our government's performance against Singapore's government performance? Can you? Can anyone? Can I? So is it fair to have a barometer of government performance on ringgit performance against US dollar? Is it fair to have government performance based on GDP growth only when it is very skewed at the top? Only the rich get richer and the poor still relies on government funding. Is it fair? Is this the right economic model? But we don't have a law that defines what is our economic model. There's no law. So, do we have a law to prevent the next 1 MDB now? We do not. But I can tell you the UK's Companies Act have provisions on the responsibility of the board, responsibility of the management, and the so-called social responsibility of corporations that would have prevented 1 MDB from happening. The UK's Companies Act. There are enough provisions in there, which our Companies Act do not have. And our Companies Act was passed in 2016 after 1 MDB. Meaning if our Companies Act were passed in 2005, it still would not have prevented 1 MDB. But then comes the moral question, do we need laws to regulate our morality? Or is it enough that we build a strong culture? I do not have an answer to that. But in the absence of a more concrete answer, my hypothesis is wherever a stronger law has been introduced in a similar country and the law has been effective, then perhaps our way forward is to introduce a similar law, especially on political funding. That would be my hypothesis. Similarly, our SPRM Act, our Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission Act, is not as strong as Hong Kong's or Singapore. So, we can build a stronger institution and stronger culture in terms of anti-corruption initiatives or anti-corruption drive. Probably. That is another option. And then if you've been following the news, then recently the government has passed this Fiscal Responsibility Act. It is still very skeletal, very basic, but it is an improvement, but not enough. So it sets the limit of government to 65% of GDP. But any government can go and amend it to 70%. Then the next government amends it to 80%. And the next government amends it to 90%. So what's stopping them? Nothing is stopping them. Which is why I say it's still very skeletal. It is still a good starting point, but still not enough. And recently the government also passed the Public Procurement Act. Very good move. I fully support it. But in my opinion, it is still not enough. So I would welcome more questions, because otherwise I'll be talking about random topics. Or we can just stop the session.
Perhaps it's not more questions, but reflections over what's been discussed.
Yes.
As me is that the problems that I can see is that the level of educations, of course, with the politicians on the subject matter that they have to in charge of, but also the level of educations of the people who have that power to make the change, especially when we touch on the law, is how many of our lawyers or even our youngsters study in law can make that move. And also, and one thing I
Yeah.
think is that really is the good example for other countries can make that first move to tell the politicians that this is doing good in other countries. Why don't we go for this? But a holistic directions and also thinking into how we want to make that change in our context is also equally important. So all in all, I would think that our level of educations into all this subject matter that will eventually drive us to make a really proper, useful, and
course.
also, yes, robust policies and also law for the country and the people. Yeah.
Yeah. Given my okay, thank you for that comment. Okay. Another controversial statement from me. Given my experience at the Ministry of Education, um, let me ask you, did you go to a government school?
Yes.
Did you do Kemahiran Hidup subject, which of course is compulsory?
Yes.
Okay, what did you learn in Kemahiran Hidup?
A very basic living skill, if I recall.
Okay,
It's too long
but
ago, yeah.
if I were to ask you this brutal question, right? Did Kemahiran Hidup prepare you for adult life?
I will see at that age, it has to be a very long-term subject that instill into the daily life and practice. If we
Yeah.
just learning it during that time when we are like below 12 years old, and then it was totally changed into, like more specific subject, I don't think it eventually instill in me. Yeah.
Okay, we had an attempt in our school to make our students clean their own classroom and to even clean their own toilet. So each class takes turn to clean the school toilet. And then parents came out opposing it because they're saying that their children are not free labor. But the happy reality in Japan is that schools do force their students to perform these duties, including serving school meals. And maybe not in Japan, but in Europe, when it comes to Kemahiran Hidup subject, they do teach the students very practical adulting lessons, including getting a social security number, making tax return, applying for jobs, and of course, these are not at Form 1 to Form 3, these are like Form 4 and Form 5 level. But they do prepare the students to transition into adult life. And it is successful so far. So, with regards to that, the Japanese and European systems have been successful at imparting life lessons to their young people. And what is our excuse? Why are we teaching people to still do soldering, pottery? Why are we teaching our students to build rak buku or goreng telur? There's nothing wrong with frying eggs. But, I mean, nowadays you have YouTube, you have TikTok, you can learn how to fry eggs on TikTok. But you cannot, I'm not saying you cannot learn, but it will be much more difficult to learn how to use ChatGPT and how to do tax return from TikTok video. So our priority in terms of syllabus reform when it comes to Kemahiran Hidup is those areas. That would be my hypothesis. That would be my proposal. But do we have enough political will to reform our education system now? No, we don't. Any other comment? Our kemahiran hidup do not teach us to select the best candidates when we vote. And that should be a very basic kemahiran hidup also.
Unfortunately, I did not take that subject. It wasn't available during my time.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Asmi, I have a question. I mean,
Yes, of course.
under when Trump became the president initially, he
Mm.
got Elon Musk
Mm.
to basically head the Dodge, the
Mm.
Department of Government
Efficiency.
Efficiency. Yep.
Mm.
I guess him coming from the private sector
Mm.
to try and see whether he can actually improve the government system to make it more efficient and also to cut spending.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that our government should also have this kind of initiative, given that, I mean, well, I haven't been to any of the government ministries currently for meetings, but I think the
Mm.
joke was previously, whenever we go for meetings, we have nasi lemak, we have quiz, we have, all this
Mm.
so-called unnecessary spending
Yeah,
and also
of course.
efficiency.
Okay.
Yeah, what's your view on that?
Okay, actually this question was asked even in the previous session, and if
Oh,
with Prof. Wong's permission, I would like to make this the final question. Okay, we had a very good attempt. I would say half success, half failure at doing the same thing. But let's start with Elon Musk first. Statecraft, meaning the art of ruling a country, is built upon hundreds of years of tradition. Likewise, our society is built upon hundreds of years of tradition. Things work because there are certain assumptions in our mind that come with such endeavor. Like, for example, the simplest one is the institution of family and marriage. It's not written in law. Some of it is written in law. Marriage registration and divorce is written in law. But responsibility for husband and wife and children and grandfather and grandmother, etc., are not written in law. These are by social convention. But likewise, in government, yes, some of it is written in law, some of it is written in regulation, some of it is written not written by established by convention. So the purpose of government is whether you wake up today or tomorrow, come rain or storm, come earthquake or typhoon, schools still open, hospitals still operate, you call 999, ambulance still comes. That is the basic function of government. And that function of government does not operate on based on law alone. It also operates on culture, the pride that each of our doctors and nurses and policemen carry when they go to work every day. That keeps the country running. When Elon Musk came with his Department of Government Efficiency agenda, so he brutally cut through all government programs, supposedly to cut costs, increase efficiency, etc., but with little regard for their social function. And some of these social functions are built and established through trust, through many generations of social contracts, so-called. And I'm not talking about the Malay, Chinese, Indian social contract, yeah? I'm talking about the John Locke and Stuart Mill kind of social contract. And that's why the Elon Musk endeavor with Department of Government Agency failed. But we established Pemandu under Najib, and it did a good job. But it failed to a large extent. And then eventually by 2015, Najib agreed to close down Pemandu. But Singapore in 2016 opened the strategy group in the Prime Minister's office. The strategy group functions exactly like Pemandu, except where Pemandu, they bring management consultants from outside, pay them tens of thousands of ringgit per month. The strategy group in Singapore are manned mostly by civil servants. So they speak the same language as other departments. They understand how the civil service work. They have respect for the civil service culture. But at the same time, they have enough talent from other sectors also. And therefore, they can work better than Pemandu. And this strategy group is still very much functional in Singapore's Prime Minister's office. You can Google it out. So should we re-establish Pemandu? Yes, we should. But we do it the Singapore way. We take our top civil servants, we train them in change management, we send them to secondments to say Shell, Petronas, BCG, PwC, send 3 years, 4 years secondment, and they come back with new skills, and then give them the task. Let them guide their fellow civil servants to do all this necessary change. That would be my hypothesis on the subject.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry I have to go. I have another engagement. But thank you very much. It's been a pleasurable experience this afternoon, especially to Prof. Wong, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we go back to lecture 7. As expected that you all enjoy as me.